Welcome to the Deepak Saini Show.
He said he gon' huff and puff and blow my mind up. You meet the island girl, she might dirty wine up.
Welcome to the Deepak Saini Show. I'd like to thank J23 for our intro music. You can find a link to her music in the show description. My guest today is Shel Horowitz, founder of GoingBeyondSustainability.com. Shel works with companies to find the sweet spot where profitability meets environmental and social good, helping to create, identify, and market products that serve and services that turn hunger and poverty into abundance, racism and othering into equity, war into peace, catastrophic climate change into planetary balance, and pandemic disease into global health. And with authors working on socially and environmentally conscious books, and his latest award-winning book is Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World. We're gonna learn more about that for sure. Shel, welcome to the Deepak Saini Show.
Thanks, Deepak. It's great to be here with you.
Yes, awesome. And we just connected just over a couple months ago at a networking event. So you never know who interesting people that you meet when you go to these types of things. So happy to have you on here.
It's funny, my network has expanded so much since the pandemic started and everybody else went to Zoom. I've actually been using Zoom since 2017 or thereabouts, but networking.
Wow, Zoom OG.
Networking meetings didn't really happen on Zoom back then.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like to say people, I was doing online coaching like way before. I just like to say the tools just got better. Like in 2020, the tools include I didn't know what Zoom was until. But anyway, I digress here. So, Shel, I always like to start with, I'm sure when you were growing up, maybe I'm making an assumption, but I'm sure when you were growing up, you weren't thinking like I'm going to write books on how to heal the world and all these environmental things, or maybe it was. But I like to start with just take us back as far back as you want to the beginning. How did you get to where you're at today?
Well, believe it or not,
doing what you're doing.
For the last roughly 25 years, I've been looking to combine the activist part of me with the marketing part of me and braiding those two together. But both of those have origins stretching way, way back. I actually did my first act of social justice that I can remember at about age 3, when my parents threw a party and their friends were all leaving their packages of cigarettes on the table and smoking. And the air is really horrible in here. So I started walking around, or crawling around, I should say, taking the packs of cigarettes off the low coffee tables and breaking the cigarettes.
Oh, nice.
That,
I like that.
I took about a 9-year pause. But then when I was 12, I went to my first anti-Vietnam War rally in 1969. And one of the speakers said, "The Vietnam War is an undeclared war." And I had not known that. And this elaborate house of cards that you learn in social studies class about checks and balances and about our system of government being democratic basically all came cascading down in that one sentence. And the more I looked and the more I learned, the more worried I got about whether we could have a democracy in this country. This was when Nixon was president. And so I became an activist. And then not terribly long after that, at age 15, I started writing, oddly enough, I started writing progressive commentary for a right-wing libertarian underground newspaper in my high school.
Okay,
and they would
that's
write
interesting.
stuff with disclaimers like, "This does not represent the views of the management," but they would run it. And here I was, 15 years old, and I'm getting published. And that was pretty exciting and fueled my lifelong career that has revolved heavily around the writing aspects of marketing. So I write book cover copy, press releases, the occasional direct mail letter, lots and lots of opinion pieces. I'm working on one now about why youth should vote for Biden, even if they can't stand him, because this election is not about choosing your best ally, but about choosing your best enemy.
Isn't all elections really about that? I mean,
most of it. Every once in a while, here on the local level, we've had some candidates that I could enthusiastically get behind. And one of them includes my current state senator, who was an amazing person who came out of the activist world and has done more in that office than probably her 3 predecessors did.
Amazing. Very cool. I had no idea we'd go this way, but since you brought up Nixon and the Vietnam War, I don't want to spend too much time on this rabbit hole, but I've been watching recently on Netflix the Churning Point series. I'm not sure if you're
Turning
familiar.
CHE.
It's 2 seasons, and they focus on different things. It's called Churning Point. The first season's about 9/11 and Al Qaeda, and the second season's about kind of the Cold War leading up from World War II to kind of current day Russia and Ukraine. And it's just I find it very interesting. Again, I don't want to stick in this point too long, but just a lot of things that the lay person doesn't know. It's only come out now if documents have been unreleased and et cetera, and mistakes made on both sides, and like all this. And I think sometimes we have this notion, in at least let's call it North America, of what democracy or what freedom looks like. But then you really get to the nitty gritty, and you're like, it's not so black and white, right? There's a lot of gray. So anyway, you just triggered that, and I don't know if you've watched those series. If you haven't, I'm sure you find them interesting. But anyway, I digress. Shel, you had mentioned that in some of the prep work that for this interview that the world already has the solutions to most of our big problems: hunger, poverty, racism, war, climate change, et cetera. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Sure. Well, if you boil them down, almost all of them turn out to be, if you dig deep enough, resource issues. And resource issues are always solvable. If you have water and another country wants water, if you have bauxite to make aluminum and another country wants bauxite, if you live on one side of a river and people on the other side of the river have no good harbor, there are going to be conflicts arising. But if you look at collaborative solutions, I don't believe so much in win-win as in win-win-win-win-win. There's always more than two stakeholders.
Absolutely.
And actually, a win-win solution often leaves out some of the stakeholders and therefore doesn't solve the conflict. But there are so many ways that we can, this is the only time you will ever catch me quoting George W. Bush, make the pie higher. There's just so much out there. We know how to do this. Here's a little abundance fact. More energy from the sun falls on the earth every hour than all of human energy use, not just solar energy use, but fossil fuels, nuclear, hydro, wind, all the rest of it together in a year. So we're getting 365 times 12 is roughly 4,000 times as much energy from the sun as we are using, just from that one source. When you add in the other clean sources, like small-scale hydro that doesn't have to flood, like wind done the right way, we have no energy problem. We have an energy allotment problem.
Absolutely.
We could get rid of fossil fuels immediately. We could go off nuclear forever. We've got plenty of energy. Okay, so we just have to figure out how to harness it and get it to the people who need it in a way that is not destructive to the environment and not destructive to the economies of the people who live in that environment. And those are not, in a global scale, yes, they're hard to do. They're orders of magnitude harder than what most people do in a day, but they're not unsolvable.
Would it be fair to say then, I have a couple of questions now that have come out of that, but would it be fair to say, that I'm going to say many people, I don't want to pinpoint names on certain anyone and certain any polarizing figures or anything like that, but many people or some people say that really all our problems they're just technological issues we just haven't solved yet.
Well, they're not just technological. The biggest problem is a willpower issue.
Sure.
And that in terms, here I am the marketer, that is essentially a public relations issue. When people are convinced that like Black Lives Matter appeared to spring out of nowhere in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, which was, I don't know how many hundreds of murders of people of color by police happened before that. But that one, for some reason, ignited everyone. But it didn't come out of a vacuum. People have been organizing in this issue. The NAACP was working on it, I think, in the 1920s, in the time of the Tulsa Massacre. So we all stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before us. And at some point, we stand high enough to grab that tipping point, if I can mix metaphors in a horrible way there.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
And, the other thing is that I think there's a growing awareness that one of the paths to abundance is conservation. So, for example, hunger is an issue all around the world, right? In the US, we throw away, depending on who you ask, somewhere between 30 to 40% of our food. So we don't have a food crisis. We have a food distribution crisis.
Shel, that was gonna be my next question I asked. So thank you for bringing up that. I've thought this for like the last 15 years. It's like it's a food distribution problem, not a food growing problem.
So we have to get that food not going into dumpsters and going into people's refrigerators instead.
Yeah. Yeah, and not spoiling on transport ships and things like that. Shel, just a few minutes ago, you had mentioned, I think you're in reference to wind, I think it was, you're saying done the right way. So, what are some of that you see challenges with renewable energy now that is actually harming it from getting more wider adoption?
Well, I think one of the issues is that as a society, we tend to think in terms of big central systems. And I think that decentralized energy makes a lot more sense much of the time. So rather than blitz down a forest and put up a huge solar array with thousands of collectors, I mean, yeah, we should do those too, especially in places where there's going to be low impact to people, such as perhaps the deserts of the US Southwest and of the Sahara and the Gobi. Places where there's basically nothing but open space and sunshine, it may make sense to do that. But first of all, transmission loss, the scientist Amory Lovins said when I was listening quite some time ago, the number may have changed, but at that time he was saying 7% of all the energy that's going across a power line is consumed in moving it.
I've heard it's a lot higher, and it's going to depend. It's going to vary. I've heard upwards of 30% loss. So,
wow, yeah. So if we make the energy where we use it, you capture that back. Whether it's 7% or 30%, it's still going to make
it's a huge difference. Yeah. So are you suggesting then?
Let me riff on this a little more.
Oh yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Sorry.
So in a decentralized system, you're going to have some people who have great solar and some people who have trees in the way, and you don't want to cut those trees down because trees are lifeblood in this planet. So you have to look at community solutions, not necessarily one rooftop, one house, one user. But within a neighborhood, you should be able to minimize the transmission losses, maximize the output, have some storage in place so that when the clouds are covering the sun or it's night or the wind isn't blowing, you're capturing. And the other thing is looking at the technologies we have, looking at how to downsize them and keep them effective. So with wind, for example, there's something called a vertical access turbine. Most turbines that we are familiar with are horizontal access. They're on a rotor like this, an axle like this, and then the rotor spins vertical.
Right, like a
windmill. You put that on its side, and you picture an oil drum that's cut like a daisy wheel. So you're basically making scoops out of the oil drum. You stick that on a vertical rod. Tiny little amounts of wind can push it that cannot push a horizontal blade because you've got much more surface area capturing the wind. And also, they're much more rugged at the high winds, but people don't realize that if you've got a hurricane, you got to shut down your horizontal access traditional large-scale wind plants. They'll break. They cannot do 200 miles an hour.
Right.
So these systems, according to the people who've designed them, they're actually capable of tracking the wind and processing it at extremely high speeds and extremely low speeds. So you're getting a lot more bang for your buck. You're using stuff, you're not having to construct huge plants to make 200-foot long rotors out of titanium and other rare materials. It's just a much more elegant way to do it. Similarly with hydro, years ago, I threw some Kickstarter money into a project that had Frisbee-sized hydroelectric power plants. No dam required. You stick it in moving water and it spins. So if you had some thousands of those in different places across small streams or whatever, you're able to capture a lot more water power with no environmental damage. I don't think that project ever got off the ground, but I don't think it was because the idea was bad. I think they didn't know enough about marketing.
Sure. I'm curious. That one I find interesting. Let's say you lived somewhere rural, maybe close to a stream.
This is what it looks like out my window.
Is that snow?
No, it's not snow. Let me get you closer.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Nice.
it's a beautiful farm called Barstow's Longview Farm that I'm lucky enough to live on. I don't farm it. My neighbors have 600 cows. I think about 400 acres, and behind them is a state park with a very famous mountain called Mount Holyoke.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. I just back to my question. If someone lived, again, this thing that you said that wasn't good enough there, it sounds very interesting to me. This small, something you could just drop in a body of water moving to generate electricity. If someone lived kind of more rural or something like that, could they just do that themselves? Would that generate? I know it didn't get off the ground, but like in concept, would that generate enough power for someone to power just their own home or their own little farm or something?
You'd probably need several of them at various points in the stream. But theoretically, yes, and especially if you combine it with other approaches. Again, remember what I said earlier about conservation creating abundance. Conservation certainly creates energy abundance. So if for some strange reason you're still using incandescent bulbs, switch them out for LEDs, use 1/10 of the power, get better quality light. And so you've now reduced the lighting portion of your electric footprint by 90%. Okay, by using things as simple as a rope caulk and other foam, the kind of when you go to the hardware store to buy a baby safety outlet protector, where it slips into the outlet so the baby's fingers can't go in. Well, the interesting thing is heat can't get in or out either when you're doing that. And particularly if you take the foam outlet insulators that you get for free from your electric company and stick them behind the plate. So you have the foam on the inside, the outlet protector on the outside, and the heat loss from there is going down pretty close to zero. Rope caulk.
I never thought of that one. That's a good one. I gave all our baby protectors away to my cousin.
Well, spend $2 at the hardware store and get another set and put them in your out facing. You don't need them on an interior wall, but any wall that's facing outside, stick them in there. And you live in California, so you.
No, I live in Canada. It's cold here all the time.
Oh, okay. So you have the same kind of weather pattern we do. Yeah, come January, you put your hand over that outlet, and you can really feel the difference between one that is insulated that way and one that isn't. So I'm guessing it's probably as much as like 8 or 10% of the typical household in us northern climate dwelling people's lives that is slipping out through those outlets. So you can bring that down pretty close to zero for, again, it's like, so maybe you need 2 packs because you have a lot of outlets on.
Yeah, a few bucks. Yeah.
It's, for under $10, you can make a big difference.
Interesting.
And all those sorts of very low cost solutions. Now it's summertime here in Massachusetts. It gets pretty hot in your car. So simple auto sunshades. I bought one for $15 last week because my old one fell apart after like 10 years.
Yeah.
And boom, it's keeping the car 10 degrees cooler on a sunny day when we're parked in the sun.
So, we're kind of starting bridging there with these last couple of points, but like, what are some, maybe not from the home point of view. I mean, those are all great, and I'm sure you got a million more tips, but what maybe a little bit bigger, maybe in our neighborhoods or our own communities. What's the some easy steps or some first steps that somebody can take to work on some of these global issues?
Okay, well, first of all, figure out which one sings to your heart, and if you're a business, which one meshes well with the capabilities and interests that you developed in that business. So, for example, if you are in a food business, hunger is a very logical issue for you to look at. If you are in the construction business, not just greening your facility, but helping your community, including the people who can't afford to do it on their own, green theirs. First of all, you're building incredible loyalty from, if residents have a choice of companies, who are they going to go to if the products and prices and quality are similar? They're going to the one that's making a difference in their community in a positive way. And some companies think all they have to do is sponsor the Little League team. But if you go deeper and you do a project that's retrofitting old houses or old commercial buildings in poor neighborhoods at no cost to the homeowner, and that could be in the form of grants or it could be in the form of paying it back out of the savings, that's a totally workable model. They're going to come to you. And the press is going to write nice things about you. And people like Deepak might call you up and say, hey, come be on my show. Um, and uh, and on it goes. There are multiple benefits. And interestingly enough, I moderated a couple of panels for something called the Responsible Business Summit. I don't tend to travel deeply in the corporate world. This was a very corporate conference put on by a group in London. The one I attended happened to be in New York, where I could get there easily. But the speakers were from Coca-Cola, Toyota, Timberland, household name marquee brands. Many of them were the sustainability coordinator. Some were higher up the food chain, like in the C-suite. And so the business world understands that they need to at least look like they're doing the right thing. And many companies understand that they need to not just look like it, but do it. And that's huge. I mean, when I started this work in the 1970s, that was on the brains of probably 10 CEOs in the country. I think that was before even Ray Anderson from Interface had stumbled on it. And he was very much a pioneer. But there were people like Ben Cohen at Ben and Jerry's who were way ahead of the curve on this, but very, very few. Right. And now it's mainstream. Now, you know, these companies that either were little tiny startups or these huge companies that have evolved. Unilever is an amazing example of how to really focus on the things that are important while keeping a very strong business focus. And I read a book that was co-authored by Paul Pullman, who had been the CEO of Unilever when it really started to deeply, deeply embrace sustainability and social justice. And he credits that work to fending off an unfriendly takeover from Heinz.
Yeah.
Yeah. He said that the shareholder support that they experienced was something they would not have been able to generate without, at that point, probably 15 or 20 years worth of social action. And it was not a surprise, particularly, that when Ben and Jerry's decided they had to have a buyer, that they chose Unilever and not, say, Kraft.
Right. Shel, I love what you're saying here. How much do you think there is that people, in their local communities need to like focus more maybe on like policy at the, like even at the local government or whatever? And I'll give you an example why I bring this up. So way back when, my parents had a number of restaurants and catering companies, and the rules I think are still the same here in our local area. So they would do these, huge weddings and stuff like this, right? And then, on Saturday, and then come Sunday, Monday, like you have actually like leftovers, and they could not, because it was already cooked, they could not donate it to the local. Like, we would reserve this, we would eat this ourselves. It would be on the regular lunch menu buffet on Monday, but we could not give it to like the local food bank or any of these other things locally because it had already been processed. And I think to this day, I still think like, yes, you got to have safety and all this stuff, and there's got to be parameters, but like, why not? This is like a lost opportunity. So I don't know. So I guess that just brings me back to my point of like, where's there's like maybe changing some policies, and maybe that's there's taking action in certain ways, and there's like maybe the policy side and trying to change those. Yeah.
And it's a both and. And there'll be some people who are drawn to the lobbying and the writing of legislation. And there are some people who are just drawn to standing in front of the corporate offices with picket signs. And there are some who are out there educating in one-on-one and one-to-many as speakers, as writers. And we need all of it. We need all of it. And I totally agree with you that the food safety sanitation laws need to be adjusted so that people can make donations. We have been fortunate, like when we did my daughter's wedding, we had a huge amount of food left over, and we were able to give it to not a food pantry, but a community kitchen that served meals for hungry and homeless people. And they were happy to have it, and it didn't break the law. But, as you know, growing up in the restaurant business, but a lot of people don't realize that when you make an order at a restaurant, a lot of the stuff is pre-cooked, and they have to have a real sense of how many they're going to sell that day and how to really balance the need to have enough inventory. Because if you're cooking something from scratch and somebody walks in and they're expecting it 8 minutes later, and you show up 40 minutes later with the finished food, you're never going to see that person again. They may not have even waited. They might have walked out
sure.
on holding the unpaid for food. So there's a lot to juggle there. and we definitely need to be looking at policy issues to make that food available to the people who need it. Interestingly enough, at one point I was doing an interview like this, and the host said to me, "What would you do for a pizza shop owner?" And so on the spot, this is what I came up with. Okay, so pizza shops are pretty dead like every restaurant on a Monday, maybe a Tuesday also. So make that day a day where you provide prepaid lunches to kids at a local inner city high school. And you recruit some of those kids to make the pizzas, to sell the pizzas and collect the money on Friday. Maybe even to grow the tomatoes, the garlic, the onions, the oregano. You give these kids skills, so they're entering the workforce with something on their resume. You fill the slow day at the pizza shop with prepaid orders that you know exactly how much you need to make. You are providing the school children who are eating these teenagers who probably hate the cafeteria food, with something they like and are willing to eat and something that's healthy. And then you can tell them, oh, by the way, the reason this tastes so good is we've got a mix of 50% whole wheat flour in it, and it's organically grown, and that's why it's so yummy, but it's also really good for you. So you can break the patterns that lead to obesity, diabetes, etc. So, this is what I'm talking about when I say you have multiple wins. You look for having every player basically being able to dance the victory dance.
Yeah, awesome. So, Shel, as we slowly come to a close here, again, this is, I'm all about health. This is not a health podcast per se, but I do like to ask my guests, what is, one or two things that, maybe it's your morning routine, or what's a non-negotiable in regards to your own health?
Well, I will not say I always succeed, but I succeed most of the time in getting at least 2 hours of exercise a day. And this is for me personally. And some of that was that when I was doing 1 hour a day, I got a little wake up call from my doctor saying, what's that cholesterol there? Watch your weight. Things are starting to happen we don't like. And I still have a round belly, but it's and I'm not doing like marathons. I'm doing 2 hours of moderate to light exercise, walking, hiking, biking. The most vigorous thing I do is dancing, and I don't do that more than a few times a month, but I really enjoy
what kind of dancing?
Free form rock and roll.
Okay.
And I will boogie if I'm short on exercise that day, and I'll have a great time. And like I went to a wedding couple weeks ago, and my wife and I were on the dance floor for the entire time, basically.
Awesome.
Dancing
is great exercise.
I tend to average, usually I succeed on non-travel days. I succeed about 95% of the time in getting at least 2 hours, and usually somewhere around 2.25 every day. And then, so for the days that I don't make it, if I'm only made 100 minutes instead of 120, I don't worry about that because I've kind of banked credit. Travel days are different. I don't try to make the quota on travel days. If I'm at a place, sometimes I may double the quota. I'll be like, there was one day we spent 4 hours walking entirely across the city of Naples, Italy. But on the days that I'm actually in a plane, it's very hard to get that quota, and I don't beat myself up if I don't make it. Yeah. So that's one. I have been a vegetarian since age 16, and I think that helps to keep me healthy, as well as helping to keep the world in balance. And eating less meat, by the way, is probably the easiest thing to make a difference in the world that individuals can do. And mind you, I'm not saying that individual action is sufficient. We absolutely need pressure on the corporations, on the governments, on the institutions like hospitals and colleges to make sure they're doing their part institutionally. That's where the real change comes. The ag sector, all of these things. That farm that I showed you, that's a no-till farm. And when I moved here, it was not. I didn't have anything to do with that decision, but it's great that they do. They're very forward-thinking. I actually heat my house with hot water generated by cow poop and food waste that they feed into a digester.
Cool.
So we were heating 8 houses on the farm with that system, and it's a green system.
Yeah,
there's always things you can do. I have actually one of the things you'll find on my freebies page, which is goingbeyondsustainability.com/freebies. There is a little ebook with 111 different ways to save water and energy. It's called Painless Green. So that's a little, I can't really call it a how-to manual because it's really just a big brainstorm. I just sat down and like in 2 shifts, I just banged out what I was thinking about. And it's the tip of the iceberg, but it'll get people thinking. Just as one example, how we use water. Most of us are trained to turn on the faucet full force for 3 minutes while we brush our teeth. Most of the water goes right down the drain, gallons and gallons of it. I turn the tap on as little as I can, wet my toothbrush, turn it off again,
That's
add
what I
the
do
toothbrush,
too.
and I brush. And then I rinse it again at the end, turning teaspoons of wasted water into, turning gallons of wasted water into teaspoons. And if every person did that, I think California might not have a drought, which they're now not having right now. But
And drought conditions are spreading and spreading further and further around the world. So, but
yes, they are.
I do want to mention. So Shel mentioned that book, and I think I'm going to download that book too myself.
While we're talking about books,
And we're gonna and guerrilla marketing to heal the world. We're gonna have in the show notes links to all of Shel's, how to get his free gifts, how to contact him, all those links to everything there in the show notes. So if you want to learn more about it, grab the book. It'll all be there for you. Shel, before we wrap up, what is one last golden nugget or something you would love to leave for the audience?
Well, one of the things I'm willing to give is that if you have been on this call, I normally give anybody who asks a 15-minute consult for free. That goes up to 30 minutes if you say, oh, I saw you on Deepak's show. And that is enough time to really start looking at about how your company can find its own unique way to combine profitability with environmental good and social justice.
Hey, that's an amazing gift. Getting someone's personal time is an amazing gift. So jump on that. And again, we'll have the link for that in the show notes as well. Shel, so appreciative of you. I mean, we could riff on all these topics. We just pulled on a few little threads. Maybe there's a round two in the future. We'll see. But yeah, we could riff for a couple hours on here. But I really appreciate you being on the show today and dropping your wisdom. And everyone, yes, if I think we all need to be concerned about the environment, regardless of where you're on the political spectrum, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. Like, we all need to do our part, I believe. So definitely check out some of Shel's resources for sure. Shel, thank you again for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Deepak, for having me.
All right, I'm going to throw it to J23, who's going to guide us out with some music. And don't forget to also check out today's sponsor of the show. And again, thank you for listening to the Deepak Saini Show. Remember, exceptional results for the exceptional you. Till next time. This episode is brought to you by Bioptimizers and their herbal parasite guardian product. Now, I don't take this too often, but if I'm going to Mexico or some other, Caribbean nation or someplace like that where, the food's maybe a little iffy, I will take this along with me and pop a couple of these after I have maybe a questionable meal, maybe from a food cart or something like that. So again, it's just something nice to have in the arsenal. So again, you can check out the link here and get 10% off this product or many of the other products that Bioptimizers has. I love their magnesium. I love their digestive enzymes and so on. So check it out. The link here for 10% off or more. Cheers.
Podcast produced by the Minted Green Company